Hello, my love. We're back. We're so back. I know it's been a couple of weeks, I don't know, since I've read, but we're back. I've been busy, but it's okay. What was I gonna say? If I sound sneezy or stuffed up, don't even worry about it, There's a little monster sleeping in my bed right now, and it's not even you. Have you seen Little Monsters? It's a good movie. You probably haven't. It's about like the monsters under your bed, but he's like a chill guy. I think he's blue. I watched it with my cousin at some point, I think. Anyways, I don't really remember what's going on in this, but that's okay. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I'm getting text messages. This is not cool. Don't they know I'm reading to my girlfriend? Whatever. Okay, we're on Wednesday. I'm probably just gonna read until I get bored. So, we'll see how far I get. Okay. Between 8:30 and 8:45 in the morning, a pale Miyuki Woodward could be seen standing at the bus stop by the cafe. She was reading a book, repeatedly yawning into the back of her hand and holding an empty red canvas shopping bag that she had found in the cupboard under the sink. When the bus came, she got on and paid the driver, and she wasn't seen again until after midday when the same bus with the same driver appeared from the opposite direction and pulled up at the stop across the road from the cafe. She got off, her book in one hand and a full red canvas shopping bag in the other. A few people noticed her as she walked back to the cottage, but none of them thought to wonder what was in the bag. If they had done, they would have never have guessed that it contained 7 large cans of gold spray paint. What the freak? She went straight to the bedroom and put the cans in the bottom drawer. Then boiled the kettle for a cup of tea and poured a packet of Worcester sauce flavored crisps into a bowl. As the tea was brewing, she made a peanut butter sandwich with thick sliced white bread. All she had eaten that day so far was a Galaxy bar and a packet of nice and spicy knickknacks. The freak. I have to sneeze. Back. Peanut butter sandwich with thick sliced white bread. It's giving Courtney vibes. What else? Knickknacks, spicy knickknacks, and she was ravenous. Before she put the jar away, she couldn't resist scooping out a generous spoonful of peanut butter and eating it in one go. As soon as she swallowed it, she felt it blocking her windpipe, and she fought for her breath. She could only think of what an embarrassing way this would be to die. Blah 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 blah. Keep losing my spot. To die. After thumping her chest and swigging some much too hot tea, her breathing slowly returned to normal. Sitting at the small table by the window, she made a point of eating her sandwich in a much more sedate, less life-threatening manner. It was sunny outside, and she didn't want to waste the rest of the daylight, so as soon as she finished eating, she stepped back into her walking boots, put on her coat, and went out. Not along the coast path this time, but inland through the fields. She walked down narrow roads, along farm tracks and footpaths, past isolated houses surrounded by ramshackle barns, on the edge of herds of cows, and along the banks of ponds. The sky was blue, but in some places the ground was still sodden from the last rainfall, and her boots were soon so caked in mud that she couldn't see the laces. Looking down at her feet as they sank into suspiciously copper-colored puddles of watery earth, she knew she should have worn her Wellingtons. I think that means rain boots. She should have worn her Wellingtons, but she wasn't going to let it bother her. As she was about to climb a stile somewhere around the middle of nowhere, her heart jumped when she saw a fox crouching in the long grass just a few yards away. It was looking towards the far side of the field, and she couldn't tell if it had sensed her. She stood there just staring at it. It hardly moved, only the occasional twitch of its nose confirming that it wasn't a taxidermist's practical joke. Suddenly it turned its head to the left and darted away in the opposite direction. She climbed the stile and stood on the top step, watching it as it crashed through the grass and vanished under a distant hedge. Moments later, it became apparent that what had startled it as tall... What? Moments later, it became apparent what had startled it as tall Mr. Hughes came striding into view, holding a branch as a staff. She wished she wasn't there, that she could have been mesmerized by the fox for longer. Tall Mr. Hughes noticed her as she jumped down from the stile, and he lifted his stick as a greeting. She raised her hand in reply, and when he reached her, he stopped. I remember when all this was fields, he said, surveying the landscape around them. It still is fields, Mr. Hughes, said Miyuki. I know, and it was back then, too. Miyuki didn't know what to say, and she was relieved when he walked away. Watch out for alligators, he called as he climbed over the stile. I will, she replied, but her voice didn't come out as loud as she meant to, and she wasn't sure if he had heard her. She lost track of time and was still some way away from home when the sun started to go down. Ay Dios, my arm hurts. Okay. The sun started to go down. It became too dark for her to see what she was treading, and she rummaged in her bag for her pocket torch to find that the batteries were flat, and she had left the spares in the cottage. The last mile was a miserable long slog, punctuated by squelches into unseen pools of liquid earth. As layer after layer of mud built up, she felt her legs dragging behind her, as though she was wearing a pair of deep-sea diving boots. Water had managed to insinuate its way into her socks, which slowly made their way down to her feet and sat, defeated in soggy bunches around her toes. She tried hard not to think about home, but it was no use. Grindle would be getting in from work around this time, making herself something nice to eat, and lighting the fire ready for a night in with the television and a book. Or maybe she wouldn't be doing that. Maybe she had plans to meet up with friends and was sifting through the wardrobe, soaking in the bath, or sitting in front of the mirror, expertly engaged in elaborate rituals that Miyuki could never quite get the hang of. She wished she could have been with Grindle. Okay? Whatever she was doing, but instead she had chosen to trudge alone through the dark. She sneezed. Mikor. It was her 6th sneeze that day, and the 6th time there had been nobody there to say bless you. By the time she got back to her cottage, her jeans were drenched to the knees. Damn. Telling herself that it wouldn't do her good to have a night off the beer, she decided not to go to the pub that evening, but to stay in by the fire and get to bed early. She soaked up the wood stove and put her boots beside it to dry, then took off her jeans, ran her legs under the tap, and scrubbed the denim with a wash-up brush. When they were more or less clean, she hung them up over the back of a chair to dry. After 3 cups of tea, a shower, a chapter of her book, and a jacket potato topped with spaghetti hoops. What the fuck does that mean? She started to feel alive again. She submerged the pan and plate in the washing up bowl and put on her dry jeans and the battered pair of trainers that she had packed for such situations. As if there had never been a change of plans, she walked down to the harbor and into the Anchor. I think the Anchor is the bar. That's more of a note for me than it is for you, but whatever. She sat at her usual table in the corner of the lounge bar underneath the stuffed pike, drinking pints of beer and reading her book. The fuck am I doing? At around 9 o'clock, Septic Barry left the children from previous relationships and came over to see her. He sat down and she folded the corner of her page she was on and put her book on the table. How are things with you? She asked, knowing exactly what his reply would be. Oh, you know, same old shit. She smiled. The old ones are the best. Pint? Rude to say no. They always shared a few drinks over the course of the fortnight. My grandpa told me a joke like this, like 2 days ago. What was it? It was... It was like, are you gonna drink tonight? And he was like, Sosha. And they were like, Sosha. And he was like, are you gonna drink tonight? And then they were like, yeah. He's like, so shall I? That's not how the joke went, but it was something like, so shall I. Social. Oh, he's a social drinker. What a social drinker, you may ask. When he goes to the bar and his buddies ask, what are you gonna drink tonight? He's like, so shall I. The joke is in there somewhere, and I believe you get it. Social drinkers. Anyways. He went to the bar and ordered 2 pints of brains from his girlfriend. What? Oh. They were being freaky as hell. Okay. He went to the bar and ordered 2 pints of brains from his girlfriend, who seemed to be perfectly comfortable about him buying drinks for another woman. Miyuki wondered whether Septic Berry had told her about the episode that had happened the year before. He probably hadn't. There was no particular reason for him to, and besides, she wondered if he would even remember it. 3 days into Miyuki's last day, Septic Berry's girlfriend of the time, a jovial geography dropout, alliteration, with a big face and big features to match, had packed her bag and gone back to live with her mother and stepfather in Wells. The fuck? He didn't spend any time bemoaning his loss, and the moment she was out of the picture, he turned his attention to Miyuki. That evening, he had appeared beside her, and amid the usual chatter about the vicissitudes of human waste and his analysis of various items that he had read in recent editions of the Daily Star, he made a point of letting her know that she was welcome to visit his caravan and listen to some of his new material. In and of itself, this would have seemed like nothing more than a friendly invitation, but as he made the offer, he crumpled his eyebrows, lowered the tone of his voice, and appeared exaggeratedly casual, which told her that he would want to do quite a lot more than just play her his new material. He's a freak. Come on, Septic Berry. This shift in their drinking partnership took her by surprise, and her brain hadn't quite been running fast enough for her to work out the appropriate response to these unexpected overtures. She found herself agreeing to pay him a visit. All she could think to do was to leave the details as vague as possible in the hopes of never having to go through with the ordeal. I'll definitely do that at some point, she said. Septic Berry was clearly very satisfied with the outcome of this conversation and rejoined the children from previous relationships with something of a swagger. The following day, he reappeared by Miyuki's side. She bought the drinks this time, and they sat there once more, their brains in front of them. This time, the conversation didn't flow as freely as it usually did, and as they neared the bottom of their glasses, Septic Berry started to rummage in the right-hand pocket of his jeans. Miyuki assumed he was scratching himself and discreetly looked away, but after a long struggle, his hand emerged clutching a cassette. "I've written a song for you," he said. "Oh, thanks." She took the cassette. It was warm and seemed to be slightly damp as well. Ew. He shrugged. "It's just a little something I recorded at home. I hope you like it." "I'll give it a listen," she said. Septic Berry went back to the other side of the pub, and Miyuki looked at the tape. He had written on the label in pencil, "I don't want to die." There's a lot of letters here. BHCYEMTGOLYWYIML. Question mark. But how can you even... I don't know. Back at the cottage... Oh, okay, it comes back up. Back at the cottage, Miyuki braced herself, and she pressed play. There was a loud click and then a steady wave of hiss mixed with the rumble of a motor of Septic Berry's tape recorder. He cleared his throat and began. It was just him and his guitar, and the words were reasonably clear. She was able to work out from the chorus that those letters stood for, "But how can you expect me to go on living without you in my life?" I was close. She had to admit to herself that this song, just Septic Berry's, accompanied by his acoustic guitar, wasn't as bad as all that. It wasn't any good, but it wasn't terrible either. The tune was predictable but pleasant enough, even though it seemed to owe more than a little to Michael Jackson's Earth Song. At one point during the ad-libbed wailing towards the end, she was sure she could hear the words, "What about elephants?" But it was the rest of the lyrics, the ones that weren't inquiring about elephants, that worried her the most. They told of how he could see the beauty within her, but could see no beauty without her. It seemed to be a desperate plea for her to love him so that he might not perish as a direct result of a broken heart. Septic Barry had faded the song out by carrying on singing and playing while moving away from his cassette recorder, through the caravan's front door, down the steps, and over to the other side of the field. When only the hiss and rumble remained, she pressed the stop button and wondered what on earth she should do. With the addition of I Don't Want to Die, but How Can You Expect Me to Go on living without you in my life? That's such a long title. Just sneeze again. Hold on. This is like taking up the whole bed right now. Like, I'm on the edge of the bed over here. Anyways, we shall continue. With the addition of blah blah blah, Miyuki had 5 songs that had been presented to her by misguided suitors, and Septic Barry was one of the more accomplished efforts. Oh, it wasn't quite up there with her favorite So Exotic, a light calypso number that extolled her spellbinding international genealogy, but it was streets ahead of the worst one. Now My Secret Has Been Revealed. The first song that had been given to her, Now My Secret Has Been Revealed, had landed on her doormat early in her first term at college. Written and performed by a pale boy called Christopher from one of her tutorial groups, the cassette was accompanied by a note in which he confessed to being too shy to speak to her and asked her to simply play the song, and realized how he felt. He begged her to never speak to him unless it was to tell him that she felt the same way. It's crazy. She lay on her bed, put the tape into her Walkman, and listened. He accompanied himself on a keyboard that seemed to be set to sounds of the jungle as he shrieked in the most horrendously impassioned way for 7.5 minutes. Jesus Christ. Oh no, she thought, when the song finally ended. What do I do now? She had no idea. For the next 3 years, every time she saw him approaching, she crossed the street or ducked down a corridor. If it was too late to hide, she simply looked at the ground as they passed, doing a bad job of pretending she hadn't noticed him. After giving her the cassette, he transferred to a different course so they never shared another class. This is crazy. But they graduated at the same time, and after their final exam, he sent her another note, without a song this time, thanking her for her kindness towards him for the preceding 3 years. As a postscript, he told her that his feelings hadn't changed and that they never would. She knew from her own miserable experience that romantic fixations eventually wither into embarrassing memories. She told herself that now Christopher was free from the constant threat of appearing from around every corner of the campus, he would at last be able to move his life forward. A few years after college, she made one of her occasional trips to Cardiff and saw him coming out of a chip shop. He hadn't crossed her mind for a very long time. Without really thinking about it, she smiled at him as she would an old friend. "Hello, Christopher," she said. As he looked back at his mouth at first fell open and then turned into a smile. "Does this mean," he said, his eyes began to shine, "does this mean—" Miyuki realized with horror what she had done. "Oh God," she said as she felt blood drain from her face. "No, it doesn't mean that. I was just saying hello. It's nice to see you, that's all. I'm so sorry." She walked away as fast as she could without breaking into a run, but she couldn't stop herself from glancing over her shoulder to survey the wreckage. He was frozen, staring at the empty space where she had stood. She hadn't passed that way since, and as far as she knew, he was still there on the pavement, his eyes fixed on the small patch of air as he clutched a bag of cold chips. The evening after Septic Barry had presented her with his cassette, she sat underneath the step pike, knowing she had to face up to her responsibility and extinguish every spark of hope as quickly as possible. She wondered, what did she wonder? Whether she should tell him about Grindel, if that would make... She is gay! I knew it. Make things better or worse. She wouldn't even have to go into specifics. She could just say something like, "I'm with somebody." It would sound stark and ugly, and though it would break the rules she had imposed on herself about not talking to anybody in the village about her home life, it would make her situation clear enough. She didn't want him to be another Christopher wasting his life clinging to impossible dreams. He arrived and sat, as always, with the children from previous relationships. Then, after a couple of pints, he made his inexorable way towards her. So he said, putting their brains on the table and sitting down beside her. "What did you think?" "It was quite good," she said. Wildly encouraged by this faint praise, Septic Barry reiterated the invitation to his caravan. "I've got a load of others I could play for you," his voice getting lower and his eyebrows becoming increasingly crumpled as the sentence progressed. "In person, why don't you drink up and come back to my place?" The time had come. She had took a deep breath. "I'm really sorry," Septic Mary, she heard herself say, "but I can't go with you to your caravan. I just can't. Not now, not ever." There was a horrible silence between them. Never. Septic Mary felt the situation slipping beyond his control, but he had one more weapon in his armory. A carefully turned and well-rehearsed compliment, designed to charm his quarry into submission. "You know," he said, "ever since I first saw you, I've always thought that you were full of Eastern promise." The fuck does that mean? This didn't quite work as well as he had hoped. Instead of melting into his arms, she just stared ahead, her mouth hanging open. "All right," he said, "never mind. You can't blame me for trying, though, can you?" With that, he returned to normal, telling a convoluted anecdote relating to the intricacies of the disposal of solid waste, and giving his opinion of some of the exchanges he had read on the problem page of the day's Star. Before long, he said goodbye and went back to sit with his children from previous relationships. Sit with the children. Later that same evening, he reappeared beside her and asked if she would mind returning the cassette to him. "I forgot to do a copy," he explained. She had it in her coat pocket, so she was able to hand it back to him there and then. For the days that followed, Miyuki worried that Septic Mary was smarting from his rejection. He went about his business as if no advance had ever been made, let alone rebuffed, but this could have been his way of coping with a heart in tatters. Even though she knew she had done the right thing, she still couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. At the sneeze again. Back. I swear I'm not usually this sneezy. Or I haven't been. Whatever. On the last night of her trip, she saw him talking to a woman. She had saw him talking to a woman who had been in on her own the night before. She worked out from overheard snippets of conversation that this woman was a recent divorcee who was spending some time getting away from it all as she readied herself to rebuild her life. As she passed them on her way back from the toilet, she heard Septic Mary telling the woman in an exaggeratedly casual way that he had written a song for her after seeing her the night before. "That's crazy!" His eyebrows were crumpled and his voice was low. A cassette changed hands, and as the woman thanked him and put it on the table, Miyuki glanced over and saw the written on the label in pencil was, "I don't want to die, blah, 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 blah." She half smiled to herself and left the pub without any goodbyes. 2 weeks of nothing much at all, interspersed with unwarranted concern about Septic Mary's feelings, had exhausted her. She was glad to be going home in the morning and to know she wouldn't be back at the Anchor for almost a year. This year, though, there was no songs, no crumpled eyebrows, and no invitations to his caravan. Instead, he just chatted away quite happily about some forthcoming repairs on his van, and told her the story of serial bigamist that he had read in the day's Star. Sometimes he smiled over at the barmaid, who smiled back. "You really like her, don't you?" said Miyuki after one of these wordless exchanges. "She's okay, I suppose. That's crazy." But his face took on an almost dreamy quality that she had never seen before, and which quickly vanished like a bashful child in a room full of grown-ups. "She says she sees potential in me." Okay, I'm dying. Okay, hold on. Let's recoup for a second. Recuperate? Whatever. "She says she sees potential. She says she sees potential in me. I don't know what she's talking about. I haven't got any of that." "Don't be so sure," said Miyuki. "You might just surprise yourself for one of these days." "I hardly think so. What you see is what you get with me." "Exactly." He looked puzzled. "Exactly what?" "Like you said, what you see is what you get, and she sees potential, so there you are." "I hadn't thought of it like that. Maybe she's right. Maybe I have got potential. Maybe I could." He slipped into a reverie. Miyuki thought it best not to intrude on his thoughts, and they sat in a comfortable silence. Septic Mary's girlfriend kept glancing over at the two of them and smiling. She had a really nice smile. If an orthodontist, or an orthodontist, whatever. Grindle. This bitch is gay. Grindle had a really nice smile, too. And from this week's thread of connection, Miyuki found herself gripped with unhappiness. She was battered with visions of what her life would be like if something terrible was to happen. Hello? Melodramatic thoughts piled on top of another as she pictured Grindle being thrown across the room by a fatal electric shock from the faulty wiring of the house she was working. "You're so overstepped." On the what? Whoa. Fatal electric shock from the faulty wiring of the house she was working on. Then Grindle lying on a hospital bed, desperately ill from an agonizing and incurable disease. Blah, 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 blah. Then Grindle lying on a hospital bed, desperately ill from an agonizing and incurable disease, able only to communicate by twitching her left big toe. She imagined Grindle bound and gagged as kidnappers stubbed out cigarettes on her body, and then, and this was the worst of them all, Grindle going off with somebody else. Somebody she would love. This bitch is gay. She would love more than she had ever thought possible. This bitch is so gay. I can't believe that I found a book with a girl being gay in it. Like, I'm goated. I didn't even know. I didn't even know that she was gay. This is goated. Maybe she's not gay, but it sounds kind of gay. You texted me. Yeah, you're cute. I saw your contact photo. Anyways. She never thought possible. Miyuki felt as though her skin was shrinking as she saw visions of herself growing old in an empty home, or hopelessly trying to start a new life with somebody who wasn't anywhere near as right for her as Grindle. Somebody with an annoying voice who wore really bad earrings. The fuck? Okay. This assault subsided after a few seconds, leaving just a faint sense of embarrassment at some of the overwrought dialogue that had appeared in these scenarios. But it lasted long enough for her to wonder, just for a moment, whether her response to Detective Barry's attempted seduction would have been different if she had been alone in the world. Maybe she would have gone back to his caravan and listened to his songs, and maybe when he leaned in to her side, she wouldn't have edged away. She couldn't know for sure that She couldn't know for sure that she wouldn't have leaned back into him and clung to him for warmth and kissed him back in spite of his hair. Ew. Go back to being gay. Like you. Yeah, you're gay. Miyuki sneezed. She looked at Detective Barry, hoping for a bless you to set her tally back to 0, but she was still lost in the trance and didn't seem to have noticed. But he was still lost in his trance and didn't seem to notice. She knew there was no point in prompting him because the blessing had to be spontaneous for it to count. She added it to her running total, which had already reached the 20s. Damn! She blew her nose and went back to her. Technically Mikor right now. And went to back. Blah, blah, blah. She blew her nose and went back to her beer, hoping she wasn't going to end up getting a full-blown cold. You know what? Said Septic Berry, suddenly snapping back to full consciousness. She could be the one. The words sounded alien as he said them. He had never thought for a moment that he might be looking for the one. Still in confessional mode, he carried on. Can the hair get out of my face, baby? We need to do a little move. A little readjustment. Also, how much longer is this chapter? Oh, I got that. Okay. She blew her nose. Blah, 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 blah. Still in confessional mode, he carried on. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe it's time for me to start making some big decisions. Really, what about? Oh, you know, this and that. Miyuki didn't press him to carry on. Septic Berry decided he had enough of the serious conversation. Here's one for you, he said. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And he launched into a joke about a nun, a sex-starved poltergeist, and a bottle of altar wine. Miyuki didn't quite get it, but she wasn't going to ask him to explain it, so she laughed anyway. That's not the punchline, he said. Oh. He carried on, then stopped, but she couldn't be sure that he had finally finished the rest of the joke, so she stayed quiet. Septic Berry looked at her, and she looked at Septic Berry. That was the punchline, he said. Oh, right. Very good. I remember that one. You didn't get it, did you? No, not really. Septic Berry went back to the start of the joke and explained it to her line by line. Ah, I get it now, she said. Very funny. Satisfied at last, he went back to sit with the children from previous relationships, and she slowly carried on with her pint and her book. She tuned in and out as tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh threw a series of facts about the breathing habits of the alligators, and that partly what makes them so bloody dangerous, he concluded with a chuckle, apparently blinded to their absolute lack of interest. Oh yes, they're dangerous, all right, those alligators. Short Mr. Hughes turned down the corners of his mouth and nodded very slightly. Mr. Hughes carried on, staring straight ahead. Miyuki finished her drink in her book and wondered for a moment whether she should get herself another pint. But she decided not to. She needed to go to bed if she was going to be up and out long before sunrise. She put her glass on the bar, smiled a few good nights, and left the warmth of the anchor behind her. She picked some kindling and a medium-sized log from the wood basket, put them on the embers, and blew the fire back to life. She watched the flames for a while and moved the log around with the poker for no particular reason. Then went over to the sink and ran her hand under the tap. Going back over to the stove, she pinched out her contact lenses and dropped them onto the hot metal. She watched as they hissed and danced in a waltz, then curled up and wriggled before lying still, a pair of blackened, petrified tears. She turned on the radio. A man from Bergen was ringing a giant bell that he had cast himself. She hoped that the small speaker wasn't doing justice to his life's work, because it sounded awful, like somebody hitting an empty gas cylinder with the curtain rail. She was relieved when the clanging stopped after a minute or two. This was followed by a live recording of a group of Bulgarians creating a soundscape in a Parisian art gallery. It didn't seem to be much more than a drone, and she could feel her eyelids drooping. She didn't want to fall asleep in the chair again, so she forced herself up, turned off the radio, and brushed her teeth and got into bed. Where she lay on the side she slept on at home. She thought back to her moments of despair in the pub and laughed out loud. It was these blasts of quiet mortification that were the main reason for her going to the village year after year. They usually started happening on the Wednesday, and although they weren't much fun at the time, once they had passed, she was pleased to reassure herself that she wasn't wasting her time. She looked at the photograph that stood propped up against the mug on the bedside table and stroked the part of the sheet where Grindel would have lain. They're gay. They're so gay. Oh my goodness. She stroked the part of the sheet where Grindel would have lain as she'd been there. Good night, Grindel, she whispered. Sleep well. She set the alarm on her digital watch and closed her eyes. She kept thinking about what she had planned for the morning, and it took her longer than usual to drop off. But then she did. She slept deeply, her right arm resting on her empty side of the bed. That bitch is gay as fuck. Just like you. Aww. I miss you. I hope you have a great rest of whatever day it is, whatever time it is, whatever. I love you so much, and hopefully good night.